Now that we have the new 2020 iMac, some of you guys have been asking us to compare it to Apple's 16-inch MacBook Pro to see how much more performance you can get if you choose the desktop route with the iMac instead of the portable route with the MacBook. And since we're still waiting on the new 10-core iMac with the high-end 5700 XT graphics to get delivered next week, we're going to compare the current higher-end base model iMac for $2,300 with the base 16-inch MacBook Pro for $2,400. And then later, when we get the highest-end iMac, we'll compare that with the highest-end 16-inch MacBook Pro with that insane 5600M graphics chip. So if you're not already subscribed, do so right now, and be sure to check out our Apple product merch if this video helps you out. Now, the biggest benefit to the iMac is that you can upgrade the RAM yourself. So instead of paying Apple $600 for 32 gigabytes of RAM, we simply bought a $120 kit from Amazon and installed it in just a couple of minutes. And you can watch our RAM install guide if you're not sure how. But on the other hand, the 16-inch MacBook Pro is actually on sale right now on Amazon for only $2,100, so it's still a better price. Now, before we get started with this comparison, I do want to mention that there's a small chance that Apple will update the 16-inch MacBook Pro with 10th generation CPUs sometime this fall. And then there's also the fact that Apple is switching to their own Apple Silicon chips very soon, probably sometime next year for the 16-inch MacBook Pro. But if you need a Mac right now, this video is for you. Before we get into our performance testing, I want to talk about the overall user experience differences. Obviously, with the MacBook Pro, you can take it with you, so that itself is a massive advantage over the iMac. But we here at MaxTech use 3 desktop Macs for editing, so that shows that there's also some great reasons to use desktop Macs. One of those reasons is the extra ports. Instead of just getting 4 Thunderbolt 3 ports on the MacBook Pro, the iMac gets 4 USB-A ports, 2 Thunderbolt 3 ports, a high-speed UHS 2 SD card reader, and an Ethernet jack, with the option of paying $100 more for a 10 gigabit Ethernet port. Along with that, the iMac also gets a much larger 27-inch display with incredible 5K resolution that's so sharp that you won't be able to go back to a 4K monitor, let alone a 1080p display. But the 3K resolution on the 16-inch MacBook Pro is definitely great for its size. And by the way, this 2020 iMac is the first one ever that supports HDR video playback, just like the MacBook Pro, which we discovered thanks to an email sent to us from one of our viewers. Thanks, Carl. But what's great about the MacBook Pro is that you get the same great color accuracy with P3 wide color gamut, you get the same 500 nits of brightness and True Tone technology. One difference that might be huge for you is the fact that the 2025K iMac finally gets a 1080p webcam compared to 720p on the MacBook Pro. So here's a quick comparison. This is a video and audio quality test using the 16-inch MacBook Pro and its 720p webcam and the studio microphones. And this is the video and audio quality of the 2025K iMac with its new 1080p webcam and the upgraded microphones. Let me know what you think down below. Now, as far as the speakers, they sound great in both of these Macs, much better than a lot of people expect. But the ones in the iMac are crazy loud. So let me show you guys how big of a difference there really is. So basically, if you're looking for a desktop setup for working from home, the iMac is going to be a great choice. But if you think you might potentially take it with you on a business meeting or anything like that, the MacBook Pro will be better for you. But of course, there's still the performance aspect of this comparison, and the numbers you're about to see might finally confirm the choice that you're leaning towards. And before we begin, I want to show you guys the specs and the prices, while I mention that this year's results will be way different because the 5K iMac now finally comes with the T2 chip and AMD's latest Navi graphics, which both help with hardware encoding and decoding of HEVC footage. Starting out with Geekbench 5's CPU test, the iMac absolutely kills the MacBook Pro in terms of single-core performance. But then in multi-core, there is an even bigger difference, with the iMac being a massive 58% faster than the MacBook Pro at around the same price, and that's because it's packing an 8-core processor instead of a 6-core. And then moving on to the Cinebench R20 CPU stress test, which factors in the cooling system performance, the iMac is now 81% more powerful than the MacBook Pro, which shows that the MacBook is definitely being limited by the thin, cooler design. Now before we get into the graphics benchmarks, I want to test out the SSD speed using the Blackmagic disk speed test. And it looks like the MacBook Pro actually has a slightly faster SSD in both read speed and write speed, even though they're the exact same size. Testing the raw graphics performance of these machines, the iMac was a massive 72% more powerful. And the best part is that these new graphics cards are finally now built using AMD's latest Navi architecture, which will help even more for video editing, as you'll see in just a minute. Now moving on to our Unigine Heaven gaming benchmark using the Extreme preset, the iMac gives you about a 35% improvement in terms of FPS for gaming in general. But keep in mind that both of these Macs have much higher end graphics cards for gaming, and we'll be comparing them once we get our higher end iMac in, so be sure to subscribe right now. And since that test uses OpenGL, we decided to run a couple of metal benchmarks using GFX Bench Metal 5.0. And in the Aztec Ruins test, the iMac was around 58% faster in terms of FPS. And for the Manhattan test, there was a smaller difference of around 50% more FPS for the iMac compared to the base 16-inch MacBook Pro. I also decided to run Nova Bench, which uses a mixture of CPU and GPU to give you an overall performance score for the entire system. And the iMac was only around 25% faster in this test, which was pretty interesting. Now before we move on to the real-world video editing test using Final Cut Pro 10, I want to quickly run a photo editing test using Lightroom Classic and exporting 542 megapixel RAW photos. Here, the iMac was much quicker than the MacBook Pro thanks to that 8-core CPU and 32 gigs of RAM, compared to only 16 on the base 16-inch MacBook Pro. So that's a huge benefit for the iMac, since you can get 32 gigs of RAM from Amazon using the link below for only $120 instead of paying $400 for 32 gigs on the MacBook Pro. And that's a big deal, since RAM is extremely important for photo editing. Now getting into video editing and Final Cut with the classic Bruce X benchmark, the iMac was almost twice as fast as the MacBook Pro thanks to that 5500 XT graphics card. And we saw basically the same results in our 1-minute HEVC stabilization test, so the extra time saved can really add up if you do a lot of stabilization. And then exporting a 5-minute H.264 4K clip, which is the most common format that YouTubers use, the iMac was faster by about 37 seconds, which isn't as much as before. Now what makes this result so interesting is that last year, the highest end iMac with the i9 processor and the top of the line Vega 48 graphics card took even longer in this test. And that's because the new 2020 iMac has newer hardware technology, so it's very impressive. And then moving on to exporting a 5-minute 4K HEVC clip, which is quickly becoming the new standard format, the iMac finished about 27 seconds faster than the MacBook Pro. Now this is where it gets insane, and this is what really makes these 2020 iMacs so special. The top of the line 2019 5K iMac actually took over twice as long as this new iMac, which is over $1,000 cheaper. And that's because this new iMac has Apple's T2 chip and Navi-based Graphics, which both help with hardware HEVC encoding and decoding. And for those of you buying Canon's new EOS R5 camera, we transcoded 4K 10-bit 422 footage, and the iMac saved us about 15 minutes compared to the MacBook Pro, which actually was faster than we expected. And to finish things off, we exported a 5-minute Canon C200 RAW clip, and the iMac saved us 3.5 minutes, so it should be quite a bit better for high-end RAW codecs as well. So with all of those tests finished, we can tell you that the iMac is definitely the better choice compared to the 16-inch MacBook Pro if you want as much performance as possible for around the same $2,400 price. Now this is actually surprising because last year we told people to buy the MacBook Pro instead because of the T2 chip and the Navi-based graphics, but now the iMac finally has both of those. And by the way, it's also much quieter under load since it has a larger cooling system. And not only that, but the speakers, the webcam, the display, and the ports are much better than what you get with the 16-inch MacBook Pro. So if you need a high-end iMac and you don't really care that much about portability, this new 2020 iMac is an absolutely killer deal. In fact, we compared it to the $5,000 iMac Pro and it beat it in many of these tests. So definitely check out that video after this one is over. But if you want a Mac you can take with you, the base 16-inch MacBook Pro is still very impressive for how thin it is. And it's actually a great deal since it's currently on sale on Amazon for only $2,100. And if it's not powerful enough for your needs, we're going to be comparing the high-end model to the high-end iMac very soon. So go ahead and click that circle above to subscribe, and be sure to check out our Apple product merch down below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.